Having a baby in this economy and starting to build a family is one of the things that Gen Z is not prioritizing right now. And I think that this is definitely kind of a twofold reasoning. As someone who is Gen Z, who is 23, and I also am having a baby right now in this crazy economy. I want to bring a little bit of insight into this for both Gen Z and maybe for those generations above us who are not quite understanding maybe the full depth of what this generation is saying. Now, the thing about a lot of Gen Zers right now is that they grew up in households where, or at least in the school systems where, like the culture in general, where it was basically said, but listen, you can, pursue what you want to pursue and go for your dreams and like everything like that, but be aware that not everyone is capable of living off of one income. And I know that for some people, they don't desire to live off of one income just because they have a baby. They might still want to go back to work. But for many women, I think that when they were younger, at the very least, there is a desire to have your babies, stay home with them. And that's not for everyone. But that desire, that's not necessarily for everyone. And for many women, they don't realize that they have that desire until they are older and actually have a baby themselves. But for a lot of Gen Z, I think that that kind of was a desire. And yet there was this culture kind of telling them of like, listen, the economy, and this is back before the economy was as bad as it is today, but the economy is bad. Like you need to be aware of the fact that you might need to live off of two incomes and that you might have to do that. And so you should have a backup plan in order to do that. Many Gen Zers were also not taught about money. They were not taught about finance. And a lot of the generation that raised Gen Z, whether that's Gen X or maybe boomers in some cases, but a lot of those generations, when they were raising Gen Z, they didn't teach their kids good financial advice. In many cases, the parents themselves had a lot of credit card debt, had a lot of loan debt. Like maybe they were very irresponsible with their own money. And so that projected onto these Gen Zers who grew up in households where their parents weren't good with money and weren't financially in a good place. And so they felt the strain of that. And so because of that fact, a lot of Gen Zers are now saying, you know what, finances is one reason that I'm going to choose to be child free because I don't want to have to prioritize this family and bring children into this world and maybe prioritize building a marriage and building a family because, it's just financially impossible in my case or whatever their case or in this economy is another one that I've heard. And I think as Gen Zers, a lot of us are still very young. I think that there's a lot that we can learn. And I think that probably not all of us have had good teachers to teach us good financial skills as to how to live frugally and how to live beneath our means. And so because we haven't had that education, I think a lot of Gen Zers aren't realizing like, hey, listen, you can't go out for coffee once a week or twice a week or 3 times a week or more. And you can't, sustain this lifestyle that you're building for yourself and also, maybe live off one income or have a family. Like there are a lot of cases where I see a lot of Gen Zers, and are they living in excess? No, not necessarily. But they are living well beyond what I would consider to be frugal. And I think the reason for this is because that's how their parents lived. They are just projecting how their parents lived. They're kind of assuming that they should be at the same stage of life that their parents were at. And their parents were years upon years upon years older when they were at that stage. But because so many Gen Zs haven't been taught about that, they genuinely, they don't know how to survive in an economy that's a bit harsher. They don't know how to manage their money as well. They don't understand the fact that saving needs to be prioritized when you're younger. It especially needs to be prioritized. And then as you get older, you can cut back on some of that. And once you have a steady lifestyle and a house, like, you can cut back on a lot of that saving, but it does take some front work and effort to get to that point. But a lot of them aren't put in situations where they don't have the commitment of marriage, so they don't have to live for someone else and practice kind of self-sacrificing and giving to others. And so because of that, they're just living off their income. They're living their life thinking, probably many of them, that they're living super frugally, that they're like, I'm in a 1-bedroom studio apartment and I'm living super frugally. And in reality, they may not be genuinely living frugally, but it's more frugal than maybe what their parents are at, 20, 30 years down the road. So because of the lack of knowledge, and then because the economy truly, truly is a lot harsher than maybe the economy that our parents grew up in, there can be a lot of misunderstandings between the generations. Because a lot of boomers and Gen Xers, like, they're sitting there and they're like, come on, you don't need to be spending this, like, $40 a month on coffee. That doesn't, like, take that out, save that $40. You don't need to be going out every other night. Like, make your food at home and buy the cheap meats and find deals. And there's a lot of ways that you can live a lot more frugally. Find cheaper housing, like drive longer to work if that needs to be the case for you, so that way you can prioritize saving. But a lot of these Gen Zers who are in a tougher economy, where maybe they are living a little bit more frugally than what their parents are currently, but they might not be living as frugally as what their parents started out with way back when they were younger. And so they're seeing it as like, listen, the price, I can't control the prices. Are you kidding me? When I go to the gas pump, what am I supposed to do? And I think that there's this constant conflict of, let's just blame the other, like, generations. Like, oh, well, you've wrecked the economy for us. It's your fault. So we're not going to have kids. And that's why we're not having kids. And then I think the other generations are kind of like, okay, yes, granted, the economy's harsher, but also, like, there is definitely some more ways that you can find cheaper options, that you could find cheaper housing, and you're not doing that. And so I'm not seeing some effort from you. And so I think they're both kind of focused in on maybe what the other generations could have done better or could do better. So because of this battle, I think that there's a lot of people who feel misunderstood as Gen Zers, and then there's a lot of Gen Xers and and boomers who are like, are you kidding me? Like, I sacrificed for 10 years. Like, the reason I was able to buy my house is because I was sacrificed for 10 years and lived in a teeny tiny apartment with 3 children or whatever it is. And so, like, they're sitting there and they're like, I did that. And they're not seeing maybe that same effort from the Gen Zers, but it's really because those Gen Z individuals probably weren't taught what frugality really looks like, that it doesn't last forever, but that initially you might have to put in a bit more effort. And especially with a hard economy, it makes the effort that you have to put in even more difficult. And especially because a lot of Gen Zers were pushed into maybe a college type of setting, and then now they do have student loans, and so they feel pressured by those as well. And a lot of people, when there's enough pressure on a situation, they kind of resort to this victim-based mentality of, well, there's nothing I can do now. I'm in this situation, and so, like, I'm just stuck here. Now, I don't think that that's quite the right response that we should have as Gen Zers. I think there are absolutely things that you can do to try to better your situation. I say this as someone who, me and my husband, we've been married for a year and a half now, and um, we really prioritized living off of his income. And so we've done that our entire marriage. But because we've prioritized that, we've been able to use my income entirely for saving or debt repayment. Now, you might sit there and be like, well, you're privileged. You're privileged, ma'am. If you can live off of his income in this economy, you're privileged. I will say, like, especially initially in the first year, my husband's income was probably very, very low. I'm not going to give specific numbers, but I would be willing to bet, like, at certain times, at certain jobs and stuff, it was like maybe more like a McDonald's pay type of a deal, like above maybe that, but like maybe the manager or something. Like, it was not a super high income at all. And I didn't particularly make a super high income either. Like I said, us together, like, we view our money as both of ours, and so together we definitely made like a livable income. But you have to remember, we lived off his income, we saved off of his income, we paid all minimum debt payments off of his income, we paid all of our living expenses, groceries, and we gave and paid taxes off of his income. And then for my income, we still gave and paid taxes off of it, but then the rest of it was entirely for savings or for loan payment, and that's it. And so I do think it is entirely possible to be able to live even off of a very small income, even in this economy, but that does require drastic choices that have to be made. Like, we eat chicken and beef. Maybe once in a while we'll get like a special dinner, and we'll buy a fish or something at the grocery store, like a frozen one, not like one of those fresh ones, like just like a baggie of frozen salmon or something. Or once in a blue moon we'll get some sort of other cut of meat if it's on sale. But for the most part, chicken and beef, that's what we're eating because it's what's cheap. And that's the life that we've decided to live for right now, so that way into the future, we don't have to live that reality for forever. We can build the life that we want to build, have the children that we want to have, eventually perhaps buy the house that we want to buy, because we are living so frugally now. For each of us, we get 2 bags of snacks, and that's like our snacks. For like, we each get a bag, and that is our snack. And so if you eat it up, like, it's gone for the week. And sometimes we'll even just have a couple bags for the month, and that will be our snacks. And so I think that truly, like, people don't understand how frugally you can live, but you have to keep the end goal in mind. And so if you do desire to have children and to build a family, which I think you absolutely should, but that is up to you. But if that is a desire of yours, it is 100% possible. But it does require a lot of sacrifices and a lot of saving up in the forefront. So that means you're working hard for the first couple of years to be able to save up money, so that way one day you can buy a house, so that way you have a significant down payment, so that you can afford, maybe if you don't make as much, you want to be able to afford a lower mortgage payment without sacrificing on the quality of the house. And so in order to do that, you can either just trust the economy, which, like I said, that's not necessarily something to trust, or you can work really, really hard initially to save up enough money that you can buy the house and put a larger down payment down on it, so that you have that lower mortgage payment amount, so that way you're able to continue living off of a lower income. And maybe then the income goes up. Like, that's another thing too, is striving in your job to do better, to be better, to excel, to be asking for raises. You need to be definitely proactive in your job of making sure each year at least that you are saying, hey, listen, like, I've been here another year. Here's what I think, whatever. And bring it to your manager or whoever, no matter what job you have, you need to be proactive in that. So I do 100% think that there's ways that you can absolutely have children in this economy, but it does require planning. It requires you starting right now today to prioritize family. And so it requires you managing your money in a way that's going to benefit that eventual reality. And it doesn't have to be today that you're having the children, but if you have any sort of desire for that, you need to start living responsibly with your money right now, so that way in the future you can have more freedom. You can have more freedom to choose to have the wife be able to stay home with her family and with her children, because likely that will be what a majority, not all, a majority of women do not want to drop their children off other places and continue working, especially if it's a full-time job. I hope that this enlightened you and brought you a little bit more insight into how you can manage your finances to prioritize your eventual family.